Thank you for your time. If you could just quickly introduce yourself and kind of what you do.
Okay, I'm Terry Hill. I'm president of the New Zealand Mixed Martial Arts Federation, amongst a number of other bodies that I belong to. National coach for the New Zealand Kung Fu Wushu Federation, for Sanda, for their full contact fighting. Chief instructor for Goju Karate New Zealand. And obviously I run Sambukai Dojo. This is my training hall.
Sweet. So at the time of filming this, we're kind of at an interesting point across this journey that I've kind of gone on, and you're actually probably going to be the last person I interview. And across this journey, I think we talked on the phone a few months ago about it, really delving into the state of regulation in MMA.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of brought this up with a few people I've interviewed along the way, and I've had like varying different views on the topic. Some people have kind of gone, oh, we're in a small market, we self-regulate. Gyms, any cowboys don't get given fighters because we all know who they are and we don't want to put our reputation on the line. But then there's also the other perspective of, you know, it's a risky sport and things happen, and to have no consequences, kind of no liability, kind of slipping up on the word, that's where a state of regulation could come in and kind of benefit. I kind of want to know your views on the whole situation.
Okay, as far as the MMA goes in particular, but yeah, because martial arts aren't regulated in this country. So under the Boxing and Wrestling Act of 1958, amended in 1981, it covers boxing, amateur and professional wrestling. All other combat sports or all other Asian martial arts and amateur wrestling are exempt from that act. It's outdated, it is rubbish, and it needs to be amended again because it was put there simply to be able to combat boxing and, to combat gambling, and in particular the bookies that were operating within that area at the time. Now that you have things like the TAB, etc., that negates all of that, and I don't even know if there are any bookies. There probably are running around the country now, but the casinos, etc., etc. So the gambling thing has become legal, and everybody can do it. The big problem now with it being unregulated is, as you stated before, lots of cowboys around. People can run their own shows, they can do their own thing, and there are no consequences for it. You get somebody getting knocked out in a boxing match, which happened in Auckland, and it was on national TV, and they turn up the next night to a kickboxing match in Tauranga and wanting to fight. Now, if it wasn't for the fact that Mark Craig, who's the number one official in New Zealand, and he had seen the boxing match on TV the night before, recognised the fighter, and refused to officiate. So he was withdrawn from the bout. But luckily for his own safety, there are no safety measures, and it needs to be well controlled and well structured. The government should be overseeing this because it's a big problem. They look at the problem that it costs too much money to regulate, and we're not going to have anything to do with it. It's too much time and effort. It's not time and effort to the people within the industry who know what they're doing, but it does need to be paid for, and the government have the means and the funds to be able to do that. And then they'll turn around and say, no, they don't. And I'm saying, yes, they do. Because since 1985, they've been making more than $1 billion a week. That's more than $52 billion a year on taxes that they never had prior to 1985. And that goes with all the other money that they're making, with all the taxes that they impose on this country. And now even offshore. So with the gambling thing in particular, they are now charging tax on your ability to be able to place bets on events that happen here in New Zealand, or they're looking at doing that, I should say, sorry. But they're also taxing you on goods bought overseas and this sort of thing. So yeah, it's just the money go around. And whether you think it's right or wrong is entirely a personal perspective, but they have the money, and they have boundless depths of that money that they use as they see fit. And for some reason, they don't see fit to be able to look after the people who are engaging in the sports here in New Zealand. And combat sports are one of the big ones. We had 3 I believe it was 3, it might have even have been more, within a 12-month period, corporate boxers die in the ring. So that was during the fight night. Now you imagine 3 All Blacks dying in rugby matches over a 12-month period. There would be a hue and cry over it. There would be a public outrage, and the sport would be pulled and looked at from every perspective. There would be government funding going into that, etc., etc. But corporate boxing, no. Why? Because it doesn't make them any money. That simple. They don't care about it. And the coroner's report on the last of those 3 that year, and that was 3 years ago now, still has not been released. And having spoken to the coroner's assistant personally on the phone, she said they've got a backlog of about 5 years. And unfortunately, this one, isn't at the front of the pile. And again, why is there one coroner dealing with all of this that's taking so long? Obviously, there needs to be more of them, a dozen or more of them, or 20 or 30 more of them. So why aren't there? And the costing factor shouldn't come into it. The government have the money to be able to administer and look after these things. They don't, because there's no return on it for them. And that is a shame. People die, and the problem with the one, that last boxing one that we're talking about was, and this is all rumour and it's subject to, being proven, but that the fighter that died was actually concussed in sparring the week of the event. So why was he allowed to fight? Now, you can't put it on the doctor or the promoter, that they wouldn't have known about it. The doctor's questioning to the fighters when they do the medical is, have you been knocked out or injured in about or sparring within the last 3 months? And some of them it's even more, some of them say 6 months, etc., etc. And the common answer to that is no, because obviously if this man or woman is going to fight, they're going to lie, basically. They're going to say that they're all good, that they're okay. Now, as the medical physician, unless you can check that with a machine, do a CAT scan or something, which obviously you can't, then how do you prove that? Well, you've got to be able to take their word and their trainer's word, who should be there with them at the time of the medical, as fact. And that's all you can do. But this man had been knocked out, was obviously concussed, not obvious to the physician, but at the time of the knockout. And his trainer then allowed him to fight some 4 or 5 days later in a bout. And consequently, he died. Who's responsible for that? Certainly not his family, not the promoter, not the doctor, the trainer. That is a manslaughter charge. So when is the coroner going to do something about it? How many police cases where you know all the components and all the people involved in a manslaughter take 5 years before a report comes out on it? None. Then why isn't this? Why isn't this held to the same degree of accountability? And this is a big, big problem within the industry. This is just one case that we're talking about. Now, we have a small population of 5 million people. You look at Australia, what have they got? 35 million people. You look at America, hundreds of millions of people, etc., etc. So the problem's just escalating, and it does. And they have a lot more problems and deaths within the sports over there. As far as MMA goes, we've never had a death, and that's a touch wood thing. Here in New Zealand, there have been overseas, and again, the one fighter that I know about that we had all the data on was an American fighter who died in an event in Russia. He was concussed going into it, and it was known by everybody. His coach and trainer wouldn't accompany him to the fight because they said, you shouldn't be going there, we're not going to have anything to do with it, and he died. But again, all those factors coming into it says, yep, that was a major problem. Had it been regulated properly, then that wouldn't have happened. You mentioned the Cowboys before. Yep, people run with these things, and it's all about bums on seats and making money. The looking after the competitors and looking after the name of the sport and looking after, the integrity of everything that's going on doesn't exist. It's just about money and putting bums on seats. Somebody needs to be held accountable for that. And if they're going to allow it to happen, then obviously the governing authority, that is the government, need to be held accountable for it. You're going to let people kill each other, then you've got to be held accountable for it.
Why do you think it's such a hot button topic within the kind of fight community?
Yeah.
Why do you think there's so much views? Is it financial?
Yeah.
Do people putting on the shows fear the added cost?
No, yeah, it is. And it's all those things. And it really is financial. So, I mean, as a promoter, and myself last century, you run the risk of losing money. And you can't run a sport like that. If you turned up to work every week and you had to drive 100 miles to get to work and 100 miles home, and you did all that and you were getting paid not enough to cover your petrol costs, so it's all coming out of your pocket, you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your food, you can't pay any bills, what are you going to do? You're going to keep doing it? You can't. You literally, you can't. And the same thing with the promoters. So if they keep running these events, and sometimes you do run it at a loss, sometimes you're paying money back over a period of time. If you do that, then you are literally cutting your own throat and stopping the promotions from being able to go ahead. So when that happens, the promoters start taking risks and start taking shortcuts and start cutting things out. And the first thing that they cut is the officials, the correct officials, the medical things. We've turned up to events where there are no medics. It's people with first aid certificates. We've done events where the medics have left ringside and gone out, to the toilet or for a cigarette and that sort of thing. Times that we've officiated bouts and the doctor's been sitting there asleep at the side table. Mark would actually give you all the correct information on this, but again, this is just a cost-cutting factor. If you had a correct team, like Bay Medics, that they run just the best, tightest ship ever. They are the #1 combat sports medical team in the country, 100%. They have a number of people there working the event, and they're all well-trained, certified, good people who know what they're looking at and know what they're dealing with. So when you've got a team like that there, you know that everything's going to go right. The problem is they cost money. They're not doing it for free, and they shouldn't. So, that's a cost that the promoter has to wear. And on top of that, the officials as well, et cetera, et cetera. Then you've got the venue, then you've got all the other things that go with it. So there's a lot of pressure on the promoter. He wants bums on seat. The only way that you pay for that is by getting people to pay to come through the door. And unless you've got sponsorship. And unfortunately, unlike America, where you do a show at a big venue and the venue pay for it, you're paying for venues, you're paying for everything around it and associated with it as well, the cleaning, et cetera, et cetera. And if you can't do that, then again, you're running it at a cost and it's not going to continue on very long. Running it at a loss, sorry. It's not going to continue on very long. So you've got to be able to cover the cost. That's where sponsorship comes in. But to have these events regulated, that is, have a commission, a combat sports commission, that has people on the ground working these events. I'm not saying that it won't still go ahead, that the cowboy operators won't still operate. They will, but it'll be illegal. And that's the difference. So the police could then go in and shut it down. Right now, the police are hamstrung with what they can do about it under that Incompetent Wrestling and Boxing Act. And if that changes, and then you have a commission that can oversee and regulate it, then you will just have A, less deaths, B, less injury, C, all the correct protocols being followed, such as the right officials, the right medical teams. Because if you apply for it, for your license to be able to promote an MMA event, what it's going to need on it is who are you using as the officials, which medical teams have you got, and you don't comply with those that you've put down, then again, you're breaking the law. You don't follow that, then you're open and would be able to have your event shut down and you be charged in a court of law. But that doesn't happen. And as far as I know, has never happened. I mean, I've seen the police attempt to shut down some of the corporate boxing in Auckland in particular. It's never happened. But again, they're hamstrung with what they're doing. The other big problem with a lot of the shows is money laundering from the gangs running their own thing. But also, getting people to fight basically for the prospectus, etc., to be able to show that they're somewhere within the placement of the club and this sort of thing. All of that sort of stuff needs to be removed from it. A, to make it safer, but B, for the integrity of the sport. You can do that, then yeah, you're on the right way. You're never going to cut out problems. You're never going to cut out all the other things that go on behind the scenes, but you're starting to be able to trim it back, and you're starting to have a reasonable degree of control over it. And the control factor is really about the safety, about the integrity of what we're doing, about the promotion, about the longevity of it, not about taking shortcuts and making some money that you can put in your pocket tax-free and walk away. And that's what, unfortunately, a lot of promoters do. I mean, yeah, I was a promoter back in the 90s, and not that I made any money off it. I think I'd be lucky if I added up the shows we lost money at and the ones that we made money at. If we broke even over all of that, over a 10, 15-year period, I'd be very happy. But the reality is, if you want to make a living from it, you need to be making a profit. And of course, that profit needs to be substantial if you're going to have a healthy lifestyle and be able to do the things that most other families do. And to do that, you need big venues, and you need, which you have to pay for, and you need lots of people, bums on seats.
How would a sustainable model kind of work? Is there any ideas around how that could maybe? Would it be subsidizing it from the government? Would be the kind of only way to kind of keep the momentum of the industry going, but in that safer way? As far as the government thing goes, subsidizing, I wouldn't even say that. I'd say regulating it. So you would, in theory, I've spoken to this with a number of people, most of them being officials and executive members of different groups, boxing, kickboxing, the MMA, of course, but also with karate and judo and wrestling and that sort of thing. So what they would need is to form a commission, a combat sports commission. And you would have, 2 or 3 people, excuse me, from each of the different combat sports involved on this commission. So you would have a rather large executive board. Who the leader is, or who the vice president is, who the blah, 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 is irrelevant. Just somebody there that can steer the ship in the right direction. But what they would need to do is to be able to sit down and discuss. Now, you talk about amateur wrestling. We have some exceptional amateur wrestlers in this country, most of whom are not funded. So, and don't quote me on this, but it was in Scotland. It was one of the Commonwealth Games that we had over there. It was Edinburgh or something, one of them a few years ago, maybe 8 years ago or something. We had 2 athletes that went over, they're self-funded. So they paid for themselves to get there. They made the qualifications to be able to go. They won the New Zealand Championships, they won Oceania. So they were eligible to go, but they couldn't be funded. Sport New Zealand did not fund them. Okay? They won medals, a silver and a bronze.
Judo, exactly the same thing. They made the qualifications, they were entitled to go, no funding, none, zero, Sport New Zealand, and then they funded themselves and won 2 medals. And I believe it was a silver in each and a bronze in each. Okay, and then you have sports, and I'm picking on them here, and I'm sorry, nothing personal against those people that participate, like equestrian, and it is a highly financial, to own a horse costs you money, and these people get the funding for it. Why? They obviously have the money to be able to go themselves, to be able to pay their own way, to be able to do their own thing, yet they get funded. Why? Why, when these combat sports, but it's violent and it's, horrible and it's blah, 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 they get nothing. Now, this is the sort of thing that, excuse my language, pisses everybody in the industry off. So we meet all the criteria. We tick all the boxes and we get nothing, or next to nothing. You need a bus ticket to Auckland and they give you one that goes to Huntly, and you have to find the rest of it to get up to Auckland, which is where you need to go. No, it should be funded, and it should be government funded. And a combat sports commission should be government funded. Now, there are ways and means of getting a return on that too. So everybody has to buy a license. So if I want to run an event, I pay, $100 for the license. And that's, given out by the Combat Sports Commission, that gets certified, that money gets put in, blah, 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 the government take the GST off it, and et cetera, et cetera. So you've got a return on that on every show. Now, once upon a time, back in 1958, when this thing came about, you're probably lucky to get 3 professional boxing cards in the country in 1 year. Now you've got 3 in one city on one weekend. So the times have changed, but the regulations behind it haven't. Why not? Everything's changed. They need to change, and it needs to move forward. And from purely a financial perspective, the government can look at being able to make some money from it. Not a lot of money. It's not about them making money. It's about the sports development and the production of the good and over the things that are going wrong in it. It's about integrity and about being able to showcase things at the highest level. But when the government give $40 million to the America's Cup to buy the right to host it, no, that's wrong. That is wrong. And it should never, ever happen. That's taxpayer money that is going to the rich boys club, the billionaire boys club. It shouldn't have anything to do with it at all. If they want to run that event here, Yachting New Zealand or whoever it is that facilitate that, America's Cup Syndicate, they pay the $40 million, not the New Zealand public. And their comeback on that is, but it brings, $1.2 billion into the economy. Yeah, but you call it sport. It's got nothing to do with sport. It's not sport, it's money. And it's not even, yachting anymore. It's all computers and everything else. And I'm picking on the America's Cup thing because over the years, the amount of money and publicity and time that has been devoted to that really irks me. When again, you've got people like the wrestlers and the judo people that pay their own way, doing their own training, going overseas, getting that experience, all out of their own pocket. Then they go and win medals and produce, and nothing. Not right. Just not right on every level.
So ideally, the commission would not only just be looking at the regulation, but they would kind of a voice of that community to the government, kind of a channel of communication to...
Yes, yeah. See, the problem is, and this happens, I'm probably talking out of line here, but happens with a lot of groups where you've got people who are in charge of certain areas within government who know nothing about it. So if you took some government person, some MP from Ikitahuna, and they presided over the wrestling and boxing, and they've never done it, they don't like it, but that's the portfolio they've been given, so they have to do it, and they'll find out about it. No. Have somebody in there that knows the industry, knows the ins and outs, knows everybody associated with it, can cross over into those the boxing, the kickboxing. There's a lot of people that can do that now. The wrestling and the judo, and there's a number of people there that can do all of that too. The taekwondo is another one. I mean, combat sports, you take fencing into it as well, etc., etc. So there's lots and lots of entities there that you can get some really, really good and strong bonding and working groups with, working committees, to be able to elevate this stuff. But if you just got to leave it for everybody to do their own thing at their own cost with no accountability for anything, what do you have? Nothing. You started with nothing, you've got nothing, you're going to end up with nothing. But if it comes together and it's strong and it's correct and true and you've got the right people in there, yeah, it can grow and develop. And then, I don't know how much Joseph Parker's fights with Andy Ruiz and them made, but the last UFC that came here, the UFC, made a profit of $1.5 million on one 3-hour show. On one 3-hour show. Now you tell me any other sports event, including rugby, in this country that have done that on one day. None. I'll tell you now, none. On one day. And that's the profit that the UFC made. So and they have a lot of costs associated with bringing their team in the cage and all the TV people that come and all the rest of it. So on that note, how much more if we had a week-long event like the World Cup Rugby, or we had a month event like the America's Cup, could we bring into the economy? Again, $1 billion easily. But we don't have the money behind it, and the government aren't putting their hand up and saying, look, we'll pay $136 million for you guys to be able to do this. Why not? If you're doing it for one sport supposedly, then why can't you do it for another? To have the Prime Minister stand up after we won this last one and say, yes, we're going to do the cup, the next one here in New Zealand, and the government's going to get behind you, and we're going to work out a partnership, we're going to give you some money, is what she was saying, then why can't you do that for other sports? And that's the problem. So the integrity of how sport is manipulated and worked in this country is wrong.
So how does the ball get rolling to kind of get towards that?
This might be a good start. You put this on a public forum, then yeah, people will disagree with me. People will probably come up with some facts that dispute some of the stuff I've said, but they're not going to be able to dispute the fact that 3 corporate boxers died in one event. They're not going to be able to dispute the fact that the UFC made, within a 3-hour show, $1.5 million. So obviously the overall business model development for that was probably well over $500 million, etc., etc. With all the people coming in, the hotels, the GST. How much money did the government make on that one UFC event? A lot, no doubt about that. You can't dispute that sort of thing. But it's what it's about is, again, the integrity. So we're meant to have a sports body. We've got Sport New Zealand here. And on the whole, they actually do a really good job. And there's a couple of people in there, Craig McFarlane's one of them, who are mint. They're just so good to deal with. They're excellent. So they're good people who are working at looking at promoting and helping sports organisations to be able to get the most out of what's available. But they're still roped back. They're still held back. MMA would not be recognised by Sport New Zealand if it wasn't for the TAB. And what is the TAB all about? Money. That's it. And, that's their business, that's their job. Good on them, And they forced the hand of Sport New Zealand to be able to bring MMA to the fore as we have today. Fastest growing sport in the world. Okay, and it is, and they can't dispute that either. It is absolutely enormous. And public listings now for the UFC and all the rest of it, it's a big deal. So why isn't New Zealand getting on board with this? Why aren't New Zealand bringing us in and saying, what can we do? How can we do this? We've got promoters here in the country, in Auckland, Shuriken, Joseph Forster, in Dunedin, Hammerhead, Matt Tor. These guys work so hard at their promotions, and obviously we're restricted at the moment, but they were bringing in international competitors, etc., etc. Not something that we can do now because you can't afford a 2-week quarantine with them coming in, unless you're a billionaire American Cup syndicate, and you can bring them in straight away. It's just money, and that's it. So this whole thing needs to be looked at and restructured. And for a Combat Sports Commission, you need the combat sports people there. You need the people who can work and know within the industry.
So when I how I kind of learnt about you and what you do is through the NZMMAF. Can you kind of like touch on what you guys do and how that kind of plays a role in the bigger IMMA?
Yeah. The NZMMAF, it's a bit of a, have you got time for a history lesson? So back in 2013, like you said, there were different pockets of MMA promoters, and it was fast growing, and you know, obviously the UFC thing had caught on. But a group of people, 3 people. So Matt Tor was one of them. He's one of the original founders. Gary Chalkin was the other one down in Dunedin. Excellent people. And Naira Phillips, she owned a MMA shop in Palmerston North. So the 3 of them got together, and Naira had a good business sense about her and started networking. What they were looking at doing was setting something up like we have with our national rugby, like the Ranfurly Shield, etc. Getting regions, Taranaki, Auckland, Wellington, and being able to fight them off in the cage against each other. So basically teams, okay? It'd be individual things. Combat's an individual sport, but you'd have a number of people, and if you had a 5-man team, 3 of them won, you won. That was your team won that event. So that was the format for it, or something similar to that anyway, that they were looking at. Obviously, there wasn't particularly at that time, and there still isn't to a large degree. Excuse me. The amount of MMA fighters available to be able to run this. So they decided on a format and how they're going to run it and how they're going to set this thing up. They knew about the TAB structure and how TAB would pay out on gambling on certain sports. They contacted the TAB. The TAB said, well, you've got to have a president, a constitution, you've got to be recognised by Sport New Zealand, etc., etc. But TAB said, yeah, we're interested because of the UFC. We didn't even realise, and this is their words to me, we didn't even realise that there was a national body. Now, at that point, NZMMAF didn't exist. So at that point, that was the catalyst for them to say, oh shit, we've got to put something together. We need a national federation. Okay? And then it came down to, okay, well, we've got these people and these promoters and these people that can be part of this national federation. Who's going to be the president? And I wasn't in the mix. I wasn't part of that discussion. I didn't know anything about it. I just got a phone call. And the phone call said, will you be president? And I said, no. That was my immediate response. And they're like, why not? And I said, no, I'm too busy. I've got other stuff to do. And they said, we need somebody who knows the different parties involved, who's worked with them all. And again, this is something that the government doesn't do. This is something that they did. A very small group of people were like, okay, well, who have we got that can work within the different industries, combat sports industries, and who knows the different people and gets on with them. So it came down to me. So initially I said, okay, I'll be the president until the first AGM, and then you can elect somebody who knows what they're doing. And yeah, I'm still the president. We've had a few AGMs since then, but that's a different story in itself. The person who does the most work with this and who deals with a lot of the government authorities and the TAB, Matt Tor. I mean, Matt's just legendary. Without him, this organisation wouldn't exist. So the NZMMAF are really indebted to him, and lucky to have him as the vice president. He also acts as the secretary for it as well. But his workload is just phenomenal, and he's just such a nice, decent person. And again, somebody who's grown up through it all too. He was a fighter. He's been a coach and a cornerman, and he still is. He's been a promoter, and he still is. And he's been a representative on the national body, and he still is. So Matt's been through it all from the very grassroots. I haven't. I wasn't an MMA fighter. I did other combat sports when I was young, when I was starting out. But I've never actually competed in MMA. Matt has. He's done all of it from the grassroots up. So, having people like that on board, having people like that, that have your back, yeah, that's what you need. And that's what you need with an organisation. You need people who know the industry, who know what they're doing, and who also have a different perspective on it than you. Me, I'm old, so I'm old school, and that's the way I think and the way that I operate. My competitive background came through boxing, so I'm very pro the boxing element of it. I'm not pro New Zealand amateur boxing. They've got a few problems, but from a professional sense, yes. NZPBA and a number of the other governing bodies, really good, really good groups, and people with integrity. But, what you need is a number of different people with different ideas to be able to keep this thing growing and moving. Because, it's like growing plants, If you say, well, plants need water, without water they don't grow, so you drown it, then it dies. And that's exactly what's happening with a lot of these sports, and amateur boxing is one of them. They just drown. And if you've got the right balance of the sunlight and the water, then yeah, it grows. And if you nurture it and look after it, then it grows big and strong, and it can last a long time. And that's what you want with all of it. But it's got to be nurtured. And that's the government. Nurture these combat sports. Look after them. Put some protocols around it that can control elements that aren't going to drown it. And when that happens, things will move forward, things will move up. Don't be scared of it because it's combat sports. That's just a lack of education. We were talking about the concussion. Is it? Yeah. So he has a device that can read whether there is a bruise in the brain, which is absolutely fantastic. And he's spoken to the UFC about it when they came here in Auckland. I know he's had meetings overseas with them as well. It should be mandatory for any sport where there is serious head contact. New Zealand Rugby and Rugby League should be looking at it too. At all levels, in all areas. New Zealand Rugby, the richest sport in the country, apart from catamaran racing, but the richest sport in the country. Why? Because so many people do it. You've got all the sponsors behind you. So yeah, you could have one of these with the officials at every match, including the kids' matches. And yes, boxing, kickboxing, MMA, yep, we should all have it. Judo, wrestling, concussions, yeah, people get thrown on their head. So yes, we need all of this sort of stuff. You're concussed, you cannot compete. It's that simple.
Yeah, he's doing some real cool stuff with the brain bleed scanner and the concussion tests.
Yeah.
And I think they're doing like an athlete Warren of Fitness and kind of tracking that. Yeah. It's been real cool.
That will negate a lot of the ongoing problems. Again, the concussion thing, you would have seen that documentary Concussion on Netflix or wherever it was. Absolutely phenomenal documentary. But yeah, it shows the level that this can escalate to. So you've got a concussion in a child that continues on and continually getting concussed. You've got concussions as adults as they get older. Now this is changing their whole behaviour methodology, the way their brain is operating. They get to, and physically they are in perfect shape. They get to being an adult, and then something breaks, and that's it. And then you've just got a tragedy waiting to happen. I'm super proud of my son. He's a Waikato rep for rugby, played for New Zealand Harlequins. He's awesome footballer, but in one season he got concussed 3 times. And he said, I hated the stand down. You know, he said, I'd go along to training, there's things I couldn't do. He's a forward as well. So he said, no, I'll pass it up. I'll give it a miss. Good decision, especially for a 19-year-old boy to make. Now he's into boxing, in kickboxing. Yeah, you know, not getting seriously hit in the head constantly over a period of a 2-hour training session, even when they're sparring, you know, it's still controlled and limited. They're not running into bloody rucks and getting kneed in the head and kicked in the face and stood on the back of their head and this sort of thing. And then, of course, the game's even worse. And this is as children. You know, teenagers are still children, and they are. And then when they become adults, if that continues on, then you're just opening up a can of worms. Something's going to happen further on down the track. Can they control it? Can they control themselves? Can they, lead a normal life? Probably not. But, those that do, yeah, full credit to them. Awesome. But all you're doing is opening up Pandora's box. Anything can come out of that, and it's going to be a horrible, horrible life for them and their families if they have to, work through this. You cut that out, you stop them from being able to, or you stop them from being able to compete. So the chances of that happening are less and less. Much better for the future. Much better for them. Maybe they don't see it at the time, but further on down the track, and for everybody associated with them. I mean, I know, as much as, the boxers get the shit thrown at them for the things they do wrong in public, a lot of rugby players, in particular, a lot of rugby players that have those sorts of problems, especially later on in life. So
that's kind of part of even how this started. I was watching those documentaries and I was thinking, rugby surely will be at risk going ahead, and that's kind of, you think in the coming years more and more information is going to come out around CTE and concussion. Are these sports at risk if things aren't done differently, even at the rugby level?
Yeah, I believe that they are at risk. I mean, 50 years ago we didn't know anything about this. And this, it was a problem then. The problem now is that 10 times more people are involved in the sports. You have huge numbers, and those people that have been involved in it for a very long time and who have had the problems and the symptoms, going into adulthood, are more at risk. Will it kill the sports? No, I don't believe it will. I don't believe the sport itself is at risk. It'll always go on, even if it's underground and in a cowboyish environment. It'll always continue on. You're not going to be able to stop that from happening. But the risks associated with it, yeah. And unless something is done about it, yeah, it's going to get worse. And again, it just comes down to figures. Now you've got 10 times more people engaged in the sport than you had in the 1950s. Well, there's probably 110 times more people, percentage-wise, than was engaged in it in the 50s. And a lot of that's because of the media and the exposure and the money, the financial side of it, etc., etc. Then you're going to have 110 times more risk of it getting out of hand and more serious injury. But with controls and measures around that, which is what government are meant to do, they're meant to govern the people, be able to help the people, be able to steer them and direct them in the right direction, then yeah, you can definitely do something. You're not going to stop it, but you can definitely do something positive and being able to help it and be able to curtail the problems that go with it. If you don't do anything, it's just going to get worse. And if you turn your back on it, then, which the government has pretty much done so, up to this point anyway, then yeah, you're culpable for the problems that occur. You are the one that is going to have to deal with the consequences of it happening. And in some cases, such as that concussion documentary, those consequences are not good. And a lot of innocent people get caught up in it and damaged by it too. So yeah, you want to be able to govern, as in help the people, then yeah, do something about it, address it. and make some regulations around it. And that's all it is. You came down here from Auckland. I bet you sped at some time. You do? Because you do. It's what people do. You got a straight piece of road, you're driving, you're not even thinking, you're not trying to speed, but it's like, oh shit, I'm going a bit fast there, better slow down in case there's a cop. But that's the thing, that's the pull-in, right? In case there's a cop. Why? Because I'm going to get a fine, or if I'm going too fast, I might even lose my license. So there's got to be some consequences for it. So that keeps everybody within a certain, well, not everybody, but most people within a certain limit. All right. If there was no cops and no restrictions on it, you'd just drive as fast as you could. And quite often you'd take risks, especially if you're running late, that would then endanger everybody else on the road. And that's what the government are doing right now with this. There are no consequences. There are no structures. There is no speed limit. Everybody just does what they want. So yeah, I mean, you put those structures in place, not everybody's going to follow them. And in some cases, they will be bent, but on most cases, people will follow them, and people are in a safe environment with working with it. Everything's okay. Again, sorry to harp on about this, the corporate boxing thing. If somebody gets charged over that guy's death, and I don't know who it'll be, but if somebody does get charged for it, if they end up going to jail, it's going to set a huge precedent. And you can guarantee every trainer in the country is going to look at this from a different perspective. Nobody is going to willingly let their concussed or damaged fighter compete in an event, blah, 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 without the medical requirement, etc., etc. So, and when that happens, good. I'm sorry to the promoter for negating the bums on seat thing. Maybe you're not going to you're going to lose a few $100s in profits. Bad luck. That is the cost of running the show. It's the risk you take. You go to the casino, you hand money over, it's not a dead cert you're going to win. If you're lucky, you win. If you don't, you lose. Same thing with the promotions. When you're running them like that, if you're lucky, you win, you make a profit. If you're unlucky, you lose. You take a loss. I mean, running promotions on the same night that the bloody All Blacks are playing in Australia or something, it's like, and nobody turns up to the fights, Even though there's a lot of people that are interested, the rugby is more important because it's rugby. So again, this is the risk that you take. You have to, be aware. And same thing with the government. This is the risk that they're taking now by having no protocols, by having no actual work within the area, and allowing all these other things to occur, and then there's no consequences for it happening either. It's like, oh, you're just shitting in your own nest, man, and you are going to come out stinking of it, and that's the government. That's exactly what's happening. You keep it clean, and it's not always going to be clean, but you try and keep it as clean as possible. Then further on down the track, yeah, you got a nice place.
Do you think it's a matter of time before it goes down that avenue, or do you think there's a bit more of a fight that needs to take place before it kind of gets there?
I see it as just one long fight. I mean, I've been having this fight for more than 20 years, especially with Sport New Zealand and the government and that. I hope it doesn't take a long time. I do see it as taking a longer time. It really, what we need is somebody within government or some sponsor within the industry that has some political connections to be able to make those inroads and make people sit up and take notice. There have been a few people that have been involved in politics, mayors who've done martial arts to quite large degrees too. They've been quite known within the industry, but nothing's ever come of it. They sort of want to disassociate with the martial arts side of things with their work and their business practice, etc. And that's a shame because as a martial artist, you should be looking at, sort of working and developing more yourself and everybody around you that is associated with you. As a mayor of a city or or a town, you're meant to be there for the community. You're not there for yourself. What you think is not that relevant unless it's productive towards the development of the community. So if you can have some input, some positive input on that, then I think that's a good thing. And that's what we need. We need some martial arts people in government to say, hey, no, this is wrong. We need to do something about it. If they can literally, in the case of the COVID thing, bring Parliament together overnight and change the law, then they need to be doing that for a number of things. And I don't mean do that, don't bring them all in and make them do it overnight. But if they can do that, then there are times when Parliament isn't sitting, that they should be. They say, okay, then we're going to deal with this. This is further on down, down the list. Well, we're going to bring this to the fore because right now the UFC's in town, and we need to be making a statement regarding this. So here's a thing for you. So the New Zealand Mixed Martial Arts Federation, as much as we have brought together the major groups that are associated with MMA in New Zealand, we are affiliated to the IMMAF, the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, and they run the World Championships. They are attempting to get IOC status. We've got some ways with WADA and GAISEF and sort of working our way through the quagmire that it is to be able to get it there. But the IMMAF and their executives, Kerith Brown, Denzin White, these guys just work so hard at being able to bring it to the fore on a respectable level, and they're doing a good job. So with that, the NZMMAF have the right connections. We're on the right track, but here in New Zealand, we've got nothing. We are affiliated to the National Sports Organisation, Sport New Zealand. We have a voice with them, through them, but there is nothing. We have no teeth. So we are like a dragon with no teeth. Okay? We have no control over what anybody does. We have no say in whoever comes in. UFC come into town and they want to do what they want to do. We have no say over whether they can operate or not, or they can't operate. If Mickey Mouse came in and was running a mixed martial arts promotion, we'd have no say in shutting him down either. That's the way it works. So you've got a governing body that can do nothing. And that's it, which is ridiculous. Then it'd be like having a police force that just walked around and drove around in cars with blue uniforms and all the rest of it. But they couldn't do anything. Yeah, they couldn't arrest you, You called them because your house had been broken into. They never showed up. That happens now. But I mean, other things. So they have no authority, and that's us. We have no authority. But within the industry, we're still trying to regulate things. We make sure there's medical protocols that are followed. We make sure that we have the right officials for the right events. We make sure that the rules and the two sets of rules, the IMAF rules for the amateurs and the unified rules for the pros, are adhered to. And even with working with the UFC, and the UFC have been very, very good to us, and we work with them when they come in, and they just recognise the fact that while we don't have any regulatory body here in New Zealand yet, we are a governing body for the sport in the country, and that at some stage that will probably change, and they need to be in a good place with us. But that's the way it should be for all sports. That's the way it should be for everybody. You imagine the All Blacks saying, oh, well, we're not interested in the World Rugby Union thing, whatever it is, and we'll just go and do our own thing. And we've got mates in Australia, so we'll form another team that'll play in our tournament, and it just creates a mess for everybody. There needs to be a governing body that oversees that sort of thing, and also imposes the rules and regulations and structures that everybody can adhere to. And that's governance. That's what the government should be doing. And that's what we do to the best degree that we can with mixed martial arts here in New Zealand. There's still a lot of cowboy shows. There's still shows, kickboxing shows that run MMA events. And not that there's anything wrong with that. You got the right people, you got the right structures, then fine. But when you got, you know, Dr. John down the road who just has a first aid certificate and is a farmer by day and by night, yeah, and in between milkings he'll quickly come and have a look at the tournament and go outside for a smoke, and then yeah, you got nothing, and that's it. That's the problem.
It's crazy. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover, unless you got anything else you kind of want to end on. Yeah, that was a really great and productive conversation, I think.
Thank you, and thanks for coming down too. Look, MMA in this country is just going to get better and better and better. Look at Israel Adesanya, look at City Kickboxing. I mean, those guys have lifted the profile of MMA, not just in New Zealand, but globally. For Australasia, we've got Australian world champions coming over here and training with Eugene and working out of CKB. These guys are just phenomenal. Israel Adesanya is a god. And a lot of people will hate me saying that, but he is. In the MMA world, he is a god. So coming from the UFC, and this was from their international representative, I spoke to in Bahrain, and she told me, she said, Israel is the #1 personality in the UFC. And this is before he'd won his first world title. And she said, I think he was the interim champion at the time. She said, demographically, he has it all. From the 18 to 35-year-old age group, he is #1. And she said, and that's not just in America, that is globally. So his profile just exceeds. Okay, awesome. And awesome also that he got Sports Person of the Year. But how much attention does New Zealand media pay him? How much attention? Why isn't he on TV every day? Because the All Blacks are, and even out of season. You know, because the cricket personalities are, even out of season. Why isn't Israel? Because Israel is the man. You want leadership role models. You want people to, you know, grow up from absolute poverty. He came here, and his parents were immigrants, etc., to where he is now. Absolutely phenomenal. And those sort of stories, you know, New Zealand, America, and England, and Europe, and the rest of them, yeah, they have those sort of stories in abundance. We don't. But he has made it, and he has shown what MMA can do. And he's gone through those different courses, the boxing, the kickboxing, into the MMA. You know, he really is a complete fighter, but he's also a complete human being. And his coach, Eugene Behrman, I can't say enough about him. Just the nicest guy on the planet. So, yep, keep an eye on MMA. We're just starting out. Right now, we're just a small sprout. But it's getting bigger, and it'll get bigger and bigger. And, you know, long after I'm dead and gone, hopefully somebody is going to be as passionate and positive with the development of it, and it moves on and moves up. Yeah, it's going to be a big oak tree. Yeah, it's going to be around forever. Yeah. That's MMA.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Nah, no worries. Thank you, man. Thanks for coming down.